Hello, I'm Stephen Quinn, and this is the Early Edition podcast for Friday, Well, Vancouver's mayoral race is taking shape as we head toward the municipal elections in October. Burnaby MP Kennedy Stewart is running as an independent. Vancouver businessman Ken Sim is running for the Nonpartisan Association. And now Ian Campbell has been acclaimed as Vision Vancouver's mayoral candidate. Ian is a hereditary chief and an elected councillor of the Squamish Nation. He's been good enough to join us in studio this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Stephen.
Thank you for being here. Recently, Vision Vancouver has been regarded pretty much as a party in shambles. Only 2 of the councillors are seeking re-election. 5 of them won't be running again. The candidate in the by-election came in a very distant 5th. The party has been roundly criticized for not doing enough on housing affordability until just very recently. Why do you want to hitch your wagon to this team?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to remember that Vision certainly has created space in changing the narrative in Vancouver around investment into some of the transportation options. You know, some of the housing solutions are beginning and need to be continued in a substantive way. You know, they started introducing a lot of the laneway housing, some of the social rental type product, which is important, as well as attracting investment into the economy with clean tech sectors, and also some of the environmental movements have been pretty substantive with Vision. But also the reconciliation is something that really drew me to continue, to not let this work fall to the wayside, but in fact launch it now in a new and exciting way.
When you talk about the housing issue, I mean, Vision Vancouver has been the majority on council for more than 10 years, or for the past 10 years, with Mayor Gregor Robertson at the helm. It seems that the issue of housing struck them very late in the game, that this was somehow a problem.
Well, I've certainly been listening to the people of Vancouver, and the number one issue is affordable housing, and that's something that I take very seriously and want to make that my priority and build a team that's going to be able to truly tackle this in a meaningful way. So
tell me about tackling this in a meaningful way. Specifically, how do you make life more affordable for people who live in this city?
Well, I think it's a combination of issues. I mean, first and foremost, it's the affordable housing issue. So creating stable and affordable housing, a number of different types of products across the city. There's not one size fits all. But also the transportation solutions, I think is very important to look at sustainable transportation options, keep the city moving, as well as a strong economy where you're attracting the small, medium, large businesses, allowing people to make a decent wage. And, also what I'm hearing a lot of is marginalization, that a lot of people feel that their voice just doesn't matter. So safe and inclusive communities is important. And of course, a lot of my background focuses on clean and healthy environments. So I think the combination of those metrics are important to look at how we're going to build this city, the next iteration of growth, and solving some problems that are affecting everyday people.
But it's easy to say that we need to work on affordable housing and make housing more affordable. The question is, how do you do it? And so give me an idea of how you might go about doing that. We've seen what's been tried already. What would you do differently?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a ton of ideas, of course, that I have. What I'm doing right now is developing some policy papers and truthing some of that. Over the next coming weeks, we're going to come out with a lot more substantive, tangible kind of ideas. But right now, I mean, looking at, the issue of, interfacing with the not-for-profit housing providers is really important to hear their voices on what's working, what's not working. What is their view of the world? We recognize some of the co-ops leases are expiring. What do we do with intergovernmental relations to ensure that the province and the feds are stepping up with adequate resources? The role of the city to ensure that, we're looking at the Metro Vancouver coordination around transit and hubs where you can have increased density. We're looking at schools and where there may be townhouses. To keep the retention in the classrooms, that people aren't moving out to the outskirts of Vancouver. These are affecting everyday people, and those are some of the types of issues that I'm certainly looking at.
So when it comes to the issue of increasing density, for instance, are you of the view that more density, that more supply will increase housing affordability in the city?
Well, I think supply is only a part of that equation. It's an important part where you look at appropriate locations around some of the rapid transit corridors and hubs, which would seem to be a natural fit for mixed use around some of the retail, commercial.
But we do this already.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that with city growth and city planning, that's an integral part of how we move forward.
What about neighborhoods for instance, in the West Side? What about the fact that most of the land most of the land in Vancouver is occupied by single-family homes? Do you bring density to neighborhoods that traditionally have been the domain of single-family homes?
Yeah, so I don't think that the one-size-fits-all density has to be appropriate in the different attributes of different neighborhoods. So looking at single detached is important to maintain, of course, property values, return on investment, where you could have some variables in that around schools. I think that that's a consideration, again, around transit hubs is very important. But I think that, another aspect of that is renovations, red tape, bureaucracy. How do we move forward to allow people who are making investments in their homes to expedite some of those investments so that they're not going to be caught, months on end or years in waiting for permitting and things like that. That's another issue.
You've talked about the lower end of housing, which is nonprofits helping out when it comes to operating essentially social housing. You're talking about the high end, which is people who are lucky enough to be able to afford their own homes. What about a person who works in this city, or a couple of people who work in this city who have a kid, they can't afford to buy a place to live, there's no place for them to rent that's appropriate? What do you do for those people?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the number one issues that I'm hearing consistently, and which has compelled me. There's a sense of urgency to address this in a meaningful way. I mean, talking to a lot of the business associations, we're seeing a lot of our smaller scale businesses closing over the last couple of years because they simply can't afford the rent. They aren't attracting the employees that are coming in from Langley or Maple Ridge on a daily basis. So these businesses are suffering, and that's a problem because you're seeing the snowball effect throughout the whole value chain, which is a concern, not only for homeowners, but business owners as well.
During the municipal by-election, candidate Jean Swanson ran on the idea of a mansion tax, an additional tax on homes assessed at more than $5 million. We have a version of that now with the so-called school tax in the province, taxing people in homes valued at $3 or $4 million. Are you in favor of that, the provincial tax on people who own homes valued at more than $3 million?
Yeah, so that's another review that I'm looking closely at. The intergovernmental relations side of politics is important to me. I've spent the majority of my adult life interfacing with all levels of government. So the ability for the city to then engage with the province and the federal government on this solution is important on where those taxes are going.
What I'm asking you, though, is do you agree with the province's move to levy an additional tax on homes valued at more than $3 million? Is that a good idea?
So again, I'm looking at that issue, and I think that it's an important...
You must have an opinion about it one way or the other. Everybody does. Lots of people think it's perfectly fair because these people are sitting on a pile of money in the form of a house. Other people think it's unfair because it's not taking into account income. Where do you stand? You must have an opinion on it. Yeah,
thanks, Stephen. So what I'm looking at right now is, how this is impacting, some of the pensioners, some of the people that are sitting on some of these homes, that it's impacting them on their fixed income. Listening to the people on the West End right now is very important, to listen to their views, their ideas on how this is impacting them in a real way with, some of the elderly that are out there that, aren't going to be able to cope with this. So I think that that's important to consider all of those constituents in this decision.
So you don't have an opinion on it one way or another, then, is what you're telling me?
No, that's not. I think it's an important question that you're asking.
But is it a good idea or a bad idea?
Well, the yield for our citizens to be able to look at the tax base and what they're able to provide on these is something that I'm looking at. I've met with the provincial government to start looking at how are they taxing, what are these monies going towards, how is the city getting their fair share to ensure that we're providing adequate services to the citizens of Vancouver. Those are all important questions.
All right, then, we'll leave it there for time. Ian Campbell, thank you.
All right, thanks, Stephen.